Hey everyone, tonight we step into the smoky, loud, and slightly sticky realm of the medieval tavern. This was the pulsing heart of every village, the unspoken town square where gossip brewed faster than ale. It was one of the few places where a knight, a blacksmith, and a bard could all be equally drunk and equally pickpocketed. Taverns weren't just places to drink. They were where laughter, danger, and bad hygiene came together under one sagging roof. Before we dive in, feel free to subscribe. But only if this is genuinely your kind of storytelling, and leave a comment telling us your location and what time you're watching. It's always fascinating to see. Now dim the lights, maybe let a fan hum in the background for atmosphere, and let's begin our journey. You've stumbled along a muddy road that smells like smoke, horses, and something you hope is soup. It's been raining or just stopped, so everything is slippery, including your boots. You're hungry, tired, and have nearly been hit by a cart full of cabbage twice. You're ready for a drink, but how do you find a tavern in a medieval town? No neon signs, no reviews, no maps, just your ears. You follow the laughter, the music, the argument over something unintelligible and urgent. And finally, you find it. A crooked structure that looks like it's held together by ale and prayer. A wooden sign hangs above, scrawled with something that might be a barrel, or maybe it's a bear, or both. This is it, the tavern. The door creaks open, a slow, theatrical groan that might deserve its own applause. Warm air spills out, thick with the smell of smoke, damp wool, and spilt beer. You've arrived. Inside, the ceiling is low enough to test anyone taller than 5 feet 6 inches. The floor is packed dirt, literal dirt, not metaphorical grit. Someone tried to cover it with straw. It doesn't help. There are no booths, no waiters, and absolutely no volume control. This is a medieval tavern, and it exists in only 2 states, chaotic and burned down. You spot a seat near the hearth. It's wet. You don't ask why. To your left, a man is passed out with a spoon still in his hand. A 3-legged dog chews on a bone like he owns the place. This is just the doorway. The moment the door slams behind you, you're wrapped in warmth and suspicion. Your eyes take time to adjust. Candles flicker across soot-stained walls, casting shadows that make chairs look ready to fight. The hearth blazes in one corner, equal parts warmth and safety hazard. Smoke lingers, unwilling to escape through the crooked chimney. But it's not the noise or the heat that gets you. It's the smell. The tavern smells like a memory you tried to suppress. Stale ale is the top note, sour, warm, and liberally poured on every surface. Underneath is sweat, years of it, human, animal, and unknown. Add in mold, wet straw, and onion, and you've got something no candle can fix. Tables wobble defiantly, etched with initials, stains, and stab marks. Benches groan beneath cloaks, boots, and poor life choices. Every step is a gamble. Too much pressure, and you might sink into something soft and alarming. One side of the room is in heated debate about pigs. The other is in a contest to see who can spill more mead without caring. Near you, a man stares blankly, either meditating or forgetting what chairs do.
Someone sneezes, and half the room leans away like it's a fire drill. And yet, something is welcoming. The tavern feels alive. It's rough, noisy, and unfiltered, but there's warmth in the madness. You finally sit down. The seat is damp, possibly cursed, but it's yours now. There's no floor plan here, no blueprint, no service bar. Just a chaotic sprawl of furniture and barrels that somehow functions. The heart is the anchor. a blazing heart that everyone orbits like drunken moths. Those with the closest seats bask in the heat. Everyone else drinks to forget the cold. The bar is a wide plank thrown across two barrels. It sags under the weight of mugs and elbows. Behind it, the tavern keeper rules like a general, multitasking between pouring ale and glaring at unpaid debts. There's no menu. You ask what's available and accept whatever's shouted back. The staircase nearby leans ominously, splinters outnumbering steps. A single boot dangles from the railing. Is it decoration or a warning? You don't ask. There might be a back room, for storage, for dice, or for people who got too loud. Again, don't ask. Walls are stained with soot. Windows are cloaked in greasy cloth. Every surface is polished by generations of elbows, spills, and maybe chickens. Yet, despite all this, the tavern has order, a rhythm, a code, an ecosystem. And in the middle of it all stands the tavern keeper. The tavern keeper doesn't wear a crown, but don't be fooled. They're the judge, the cook, the cleaner, the debt collector, and the bouncer, all in one body. If it's a man, he's usually built like a stack of barrels, face like cured ham, and arms that look carved from tree trunks. If it's a woman, and many are, she has the stare of a hawk and the voice of a war horn. They've seen every fight, cleaned every mess, and knocked out more drunks than the town guard. Regulars get a nod. Strangers get a once-over. Trouble gets a mug to the face. They track every unpaid tab and overfilled mug, not with books, but with terrifying memory. If the tavern keeper is smiling, the room hums. If they frown, finish your drink and stay quiet. They're the ones who referee fights, end games gone wrong, and hold the ladle like a weapon. And they know everything. Who's cheating? Who's sneaking around? Who just arrived on a stolen horse? Want secrets? Bribe the keeper? Need safety? Sit near them. Want a favor? Hope you didn't spill stew on the floor last week. Some have assistants, a child, a spouse, or an orphan who carries mugs bigger than their head. They mop, pour, and dodge fists while learning how to survive in the chaos. You finally manage a drink. It's not fancy, it's not even clean. Your options: ale, mead, cider, or regret. Ale is thick, warm, and cloudy, brewed out back, possibly near a sleeping dog. It might have floating chunks. You drink it anyway. Mead sounds refined, but it burns like sugar and sorrow. Cider? Sharp, unpredictable, and served in a mug that was a soup bowl this morning. Wine is for nobles or liars. It's sour, watered down, and served with a grimace. Water? A bold move, unless you want to gamble with dysentery. This is why even children drink ale. It's safer than the well. No one's measuring shots here. You just hope what's in the cup won't kill you today. The mug is wood, maybe clay, maybe shared with last night's stew. You sniff it, sip it, and accept your fate. And then comes food, or something pretending to be. You don't order. You ask, is there any left? If the answer is yes, you pray it's hot and not moving. The main dish? Pottage. It's a stew, kind of. Grains, vegetables, and whatever protein was still walking around this morning, or last week. The same pot has been bubbling since Monday. It's now Friday. They just keep adding ingredients. Nothing ever gets removed. Meat, if you're lucky, is rabbit, pigeon, or an unlucky chicken. Your bowl is wood or clay. Your spoon is your fingers. No napkins, just your sleeve or community rag that's seen war. Bread comes in two forms, rock hard or hot and sharp. If it's soft, it's fresh. If it's not, it's old enough to have its own opinions. Sometimes there's cheese. It smells like revenge and tastes like survival. You eat. You don't ask questions. You came hungry. You're now slightly less hungry. That's a win. And now that you're fed, it's time to enjoy the true show. The people. The tavern isn't quiet. It's a theater without a stage. Conversations clash like swords. Stories spill from every corner. At one table, a bard sings about a dragon he's never met. At another, a farmer argues with a man who might be a wizard, or just dressed like one. Someone is dancing. Someone is vomiting. Someone is dancing and vomiting. It's all normal. Drunken debates turn into arm wrestling matches. Flirtations end in weddings, or duels. A thief tries to sneak out but is tripped by a dog wearing a ladle. Someone laughs so hard they fall backwards. Their chair doesn't survive. No one helps. They just cheer. Some say one of the beams above the bar has a mark for every soul who's passed through and never returned. A notch for memory. A scar for tribute. Behind the bar, the keeper watches. Always. They're the spine of the tavern, straight or crooked. Nothing happens here without them knowing. They remember faces better than names, debts better than tips, and they never forget who spilled the pickled eggs last summer. Need a favor? Better have a story. Need a protection? Better have coin. Want to leave unnoticed? Better have wings. The keeper doesn't raise their voice often, but when they do, even the walls hold their breath. They settle disputes, enforce rules, and sometimes offer kindness when it's least expected. A mug of hot broth for someone shaking. A quiet nod to someone grieving. No grand gestures, just the language of survival. In the far corner, a group huddles close. Dice clatter, eyes narrow. A knife rests, just barely visible beneath a sleeve. It's not a threat. It's etiquette. Everyone here plays rough, but fair, mostly. The rules aren't written, but they're understood. Don't steal unless you're clever. Don't lie unless you're charming. Don't fight unless you're ready to lose something. And above all, respect the tavern. Not because it's holy, but because it remembers. Near the fire, a mother feeds her child mashed bread soaked in ale. It's safer than the well water. On the windowsill, a cat swats at a moth and hisses at a ghost no one sees. Ghosts are common here. Memories take shape if you drink enough or stare too long. Some claim to see lost lovers. Others, fallen comrades. And some just see their own regrets sitting across from them, drinking slowly, not blinking. As the night deepens, the tavern changes shape. The loud become quiet. The lonely find shoulders to lean on. A man begins singing a lullaby, voice cracked but sincere. A woman joins in, harmony shaky but warm. The room softens. Even the drunken shouts seem less sharp. Someone starts snoring under a table. Someone else curls up on a bench, a dog at their feet using a cloak for a blanket. The tavern doesn't have bedrooms. It doesn't need them. It has corners and silence and the slow drift of candlelight. Outside, frost creeps up the windows. Inside, the last logs burn low. A final mug is filled. A final story half told. Tomorrow, it will all start again. New faces, old arguments, same smells. But tonight, in this moment, the tavern holds everyone like a cradle made of noise and soot. Imperfect, unwashed, undeniably alive. The medieval tavern had corners no one spoke of, not because they were secret, but because they were sacred in their own strange way. The bench under the east window, that's where the old soldier sat every night, talking to no one, his hand always resting on the hilt of a sword no one had seen him draw in years. The shelf above the door, that's where the carved wooden bear sat, a token from a trader who vanished during a snowstorm 3 winters ago. No one dares move it. These weren't decorations. These were reminders. The tavern kept its memories in objects, scars, burn marks, and broken chairs that never got replaced. Even the cracks in the mugs had stories. This one cracked when someone heard his wife was having twins, drank till he saw 3. There was a rhythm here, deeper than music. It told you when to laugh, when to stay quiet, when to duck. The tavern had a living pulse. You could feel it in the shuffle of boots, the clink of coins, the drag of a heavy chair. Newcomers often missed it. They sat too straight. They asked too many questions. They ordered food like it was a menu, not a mystery. The regulars watched, quietly, to see how long they'd last. Sometimes hours, sometimes minutes. A sharp look from the keeper, a spilled drink with no apology, and suddenly the room went cold. Other times, someone surprised them, bought a round for the table, laughed at their own misfortune, shared a song. And just like that, the tavern accepted them. At the center of it all stood the fire. It wasn't just for warmth. It was a listener, a judge, a storyteller. People leaned close to it like it could whisper advice. They threw in splinters of old maps, the last page of a letter, or a torn ribbon from someone long gone. Some said the fire remembered every secret it consumed. Others said it kept the tavern alive. If the hearth ever went dark, the whole place would crumble from the silence. There were codes here, silent ones. If someone sat facing the door, they didn't trust you. If someone turned their mug upside down, they were done for the night, or done pretending. A knife stuck into the table wasn't always a threat. Sometimes it was a promise, or a placeholder. I'll be back, leave my seat. The tavern didn't need rules written on the wall. They lived in glances, gestures, the way someone tapped a mug twice before taking a sip. It was a language born of repetition, of long nights and longer memories. And at the center of it all, the tavern keeper polishes a mug that hasn't been cleaned since last winter, watching everything, saying nothing. The night unfolds like a chaotic song, messy, loud, out of tune, but no one wants it to end. Some nights, games take over. Dice slap onto the table with the force of thunder. Coins clatter, hands grab, and tempers rise faster than the bets. There's no casino here, just risk and reputation. Dice are carved from bone or stone, maybe even stolen church relics. They roll unfair, and nobody cares. Cards? Rare. If they exist, they're hand-painted, half-torn, and probably cursed. Games are simple. Who lies better? Who drinks faster? Who cheats quieter? Cheating is expected, but getting caught? That's the real crime. If you're clever, you leave richer. If you're not, you leave with a black eye and one shoe. And fights? Oh, they happen. They don't start with a warning. They start with a stare, or an elbow, or someone thinking too loud. Chairs scrape back, mugs slam down, and then chaos. It's not graceful, no swordplay, just fists, boots, and occasionally a goose. Yes, someone always brings a goose. The fight might last seconds or spiral until someone crashes through a table. The crowd parts and cheers, but no one calls for help. They call for space. If the tavern keeper steps in, it's over. If not, it becomes part of the evening's entertainment. No arrests, no judges, just bruises, apologies, and a new nickname like One-Tooth Tom or Barrelhead. There's music too. Not always good, not always sober, but always there. A bard might wander in, lute on his back, stories on his tongue. If he plays well, he gets a drink. If he plays badly, he gets a turnip. The audience is unpredictable. They cheer mid-song, interrupt with jokes, or throw coins or boots. Songs range from heroic ballads to questionable verses about goats. Someone always knows the words. They sing, loudly, off-key. Passion counts more than pitch. On rare nights, silence falls. A haunting tune fills the room. Eyes close. Memories stir, but mostly it's shouting and stomping and a chorus that ends in hiccups. Look to the walls. Every item tells a story. A cracked shield, a faded wanted poster, a goblet nailed to a beam. Each one is a reminder. Someone drank here, someone fought here, someone never came back. The hearth glows brighter, shadows flicker longer. Someone whispers a ghost story. A maiden cries softly in the corner. A merchant tries to sell socks. A cat sits on the shelf like it pays rent. The tavern is alive, and you're part of it now. And as midnight tips toward morning, the chaos slows. Mugs are empty. Snores rise like mist. The tavern doesn't close. It simply rests. One by one, heads drop to tables, arms fold under cloaks, and the tavern becomes a nest of dreams and spilled cider. Outside, dawn peeks over rooftops. Inside, the last candle dies with a sigh. And somewhere, beneath it all, a floorboard creaks as if the tavern itself is exhaling. The medieval tavern wasn't just a place to drink. It was an ecosystem. A breathing, burping, brawling organism stitched together with mugs, mud, and memory. For every stranger who walked in with shaking legs and a coin clenched tight in hand, there were 10 locals who knew every creak of the floorboards and every stain on the wall. For them, this wasn't a bar. It was home. The man sitting by the hearth every night with boots 2 sizes too small, he once saved the town from a fire. Or maybe he started it. No one remembers. Doesn't matter. He belongs. The woman who hums as she pours drinks, who knows everyone's secrets but never says a word. She's seen generations grow up in this room. Saw them take their first sip, their first swing, their first heartbreak. You weren't a guest in a tavern. You were a ripple in its never-ending night. When someone new enters, the tavern notices. Not just the people, the walls, the air. A silence, even if brief, slides over the tables. Eyes lift. Whispers pause. You're measured. Not by what you wear, but by how you walk. Nervous? You'll pay double. Arrogant? You'll be tested. Polite? You might last till morning without a bruise. The regulars return to their mugs, and the air thickens again with stories. Someone's recounting how a goose bit a knight. Someone else is claiming they saw a dragon, or at least something large and winged and mostly angry near the northern pass. A bard strums half-heartedly, hoping someone will toss him a coin or bread, or even a compliment. But most of all, the tavern listens. It listens with creaking beams and hissing logs. It hears the curses muttered under breath, the laughter that grows too loud, the sobs barely muffled behind the barrels. This place collects emotion like dust. Even the soot on the walls has history. Smoke from a celebration, a brawl, a kitchen accident that turned stew into legend. If you scrape a bench hard enough, you might find initials, a confession, or a warning. And then there were the nights when the tavern shifted, not just in mood, but in purpose. A traveler burst in soaked from rain, claiming he'd seen lights in the woods, dancing, unnatural, wrong. The room went quiet. Someone crossed themselves. Someone else poured a drink without looking. That night, the bard played quieter. The jokes died early, and even the cat refused to perch near the windows. Or perhaps a noble entered, disguised, chased by enemies or conscience. The keeper knew. The regulars knew. But no one said a word. That night, the floor was swept twice. The fire burned longer, and the stew had extra meat, because appearances mattered, even here. Sometimes healers came. Not the kind with fine robes, but with cracked hands and pouches of herbs that smelled like old hope. They treated fevers, pulled splinters, and whispered charms to babies crying near the door. The tavern became a clinic, a chapel, a sanctuary. And then, as always, it returned to noise and mugs and bad decisions. Even death had its place here. A man passed in his sleep once, head on the table, still holding his cup. No one screamed. They just lifted their mugs in silence, nodded to the keeper, and let him rest there until morning. Life and death weren't opposites in the tavern. They were drinking partners. The light of dawn filtered in through cloth-covered windows, casting everything in gray hush. The keeper poured one last mug, for no one in particular, and placed it near the hearth. A ritual, a remembrance. And just as the last candle died, a rooster crowed somewhere far off, muffled by stone and straw. Morning had come. But the tavern didn't end. It simply paused, waiting for night to give it breath again. Not everyone who shaped the tavern's soul stood behind the bar or sat at a table. Some moved through the shadows, part of the structure like beams and bricks. The boy who scrubbed the floors with rags too big for his hands. He knew where the coins rolled and where the arguments brewed. He didn't speak unless spoken to, but he listened to everything, heard secrets no one else caught, watched faces twist from grief to laughter in a matter of sips. He could vanish into corners, reappear with bread or broth, and was gone before thanks could be whispered. They called him Mouse. Not his name, but it fit. Small, quick, everywhere. Then there was the woman they only called Auntie. No one knew if she was related to anyone, but she moved like she owned everyone's past. She filled mugs before they emptied. She slapped hands away from places they shouldn't be, and her voice could silence a brawl better than steel. She wore layers, wool, linen, aprons stacked like armor, and carried keys that opened every door in the building, even the ones no one else used anymore. She sang when she was alone. Lullabies mostly. Some said she lost a child. Others said she raised 6. No one asked. No one dared. But when someone wept too loudly or bled too much, it was her hands that comforted or stitched. There was an old man, too. Never served, never drank. Just sat by the fireplace with eyes like fog and hands that trembled. They said he'd built the tavern with his brothers, back when the town had barely more than a mill and a market. They said he remembered every plank, every fire, every flood. Sometimes he mumbled names. Sometimes he laughed at ghosts. And though most ignored him, the keeper always poured him a mug, whether he touched it or not. Respect, it seemed, outlasted usefulness. The keeper, of course, held the center. Not just the bar, but the balance. Some nights they were loud, shouting orders, cracking jokes, tossing a mop into someone's lap. Other nights they spoke in nods and silences, reading the room like a priest reading omens. They remembered what you owed and what you forgot. They'd seen hearts broken, debts forgiven, faces change. They never took notes. They didn't need to. They carried the whole tavern in their memory, floorboards, footsteps, and all. Cleaning never stopped. At dawn, the air smelled of old ash and new soap. Soot was scraped from pots. Ashes swept into piles. Benches were checked for splinters. Mugs lined up like soldiers. Bread baked. Stew stirred. Even the spoons soaked in buckets near the well, waiting for reuse. The staff didn't rest. They rotated. One slept. One woke. One stirred the coals. One beat dust from the rugs that hadn't been cleaned since the last king died. This wasn't laziness or mess. It was survival. The tavern couldn't afford to stop, because people never stopped needing it. And above them all, the beams groaned with age. The roof leaked sometimes, always in the same spot, always over the same chair. That chair was cursed, maybe, or blessed. No one really knew. But if you sat there, you got free refills and a sore shoulder. People said the place was falling apart, but it never collapsed. Because it held the stories the walls refused to let go. Even termites respected the history. Outside, the sky began to shift. The color of ash gave way to the color of wet stone. A rooster crowed. A dog barked at nothing. The town yawned, stretched, and slowly blinked itself awake. But inside the tavern, candles were being lit again, bread placed in baskets, mugs rinsed with well water and wiped dry with rags. The fire was stirred, not for heat, but because silence is heavier without a flame. A man stumbled in, eyes puffy from no sleep, hands shaking from too much of it. He didn't speak, just dropped a coin, took a seat near the fire, and stared. No one asked questions. The boy brought stew. Auntie handed him a dry cloth. The old man glanced but said nothing. The keeper nodded once, and the tavern exhaled. Because that's what it did, over and over. It exhaled the world's weight and gave room to carry it again. You could find the tavern with your eyes closed. Just follow the smell. It wasn't pleasant, but it was powerful. A blend of firewood, your hair, your thoughts. Days later, you would still catch a trace of it and remember the warmth of a wooden bench, the burn of hot broth, or the sting of spilled vinegar on a scraped knee. The air was never empty. It was thick with scent and sound, so interwoven you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. The menu, if you could call it that, changed with the wind, or more accurately, with the market. One day there might be lamb stew, thick with barley and leeks. The next, turnip mash and stale bread soaked in beer. Bread was life. Chewy, dark, and often shared. You didn't cut it, you tore it. Spread it with fat, dipped it in broth, used it to clean the last streaks from your bowl. If you were lucky, you got a chunk with seeds. If you were unlucky, you bit into a pebble. Teeth cracked often. No one sued. Cheese was everywhere. Hard or soft, fresh or suspicious. It was either a luxury or a leftover. Yellow, white, green with herbs, or green with mold. People ate it anyway. Meat came salted, smoked, or stewed to oblivion. You rarely knew what kind it was. Beef, they'd say. But was it really? Could have been goat. Could have been dog. Could have been a boastful rat with bad luck. Best not to ask. Eggs appeared sometimes, floated in vinegar or buried under ash to keep them fresh, or frightening. And if a guest brought their own food, the keeper charged them extra. Not for the plate, but for the insult. Drinks mattered more. Ale was the lifeblood, warm, flat, and cloudy. It filled mugs from sunrise to moonrise. Stronger drinks were rare, but not impossible. Mead for those with coin. Cider for those with trees. Spirits? You'd have to whisper for those. They arrived in small flasks, passed quietly, sipped carefully. One sip too many, and you'd see the devil himself dancing on the rafters. Water was the most dangerous thing in the building, unless it had been boiled, spiced, or disguised. Children drank ale too. Watered down, sure, but still ale. Better a dizzy child than a dead one. And yet, despite its flaws, the food brought people together. People sat closer when soup was served. They passed the salt with ceremony, tore bread like a treaty, and argued about whose spoon had more stew. A good bowl could heal a long day. A bad one could spark a fight. And some nights it wasn't the meal, but what came with it, a story, a song, or a sudden memory of a better time, that made it unforgettable. Some dishes became legend. There was the 7-herb pottage, rumored to cure heartbreak or cause it. Dragon's breath beans, which burned more going in than out. And midwife's surprise, a pudding no one could describe without crying. Recipes weren't written down. They lived in muscle memory, in the scrape of a ladle, in the tilt of a pot. Every cook had secrets. A spice from the east, a root dug during a full moon, a bone that had never been cleaned, only reused. No one asked how it all worked. They just ate. And if it tasted good, they said nothing, because the cook might change it next time. Sometimes the tavern welcomed travelers who brought new flavors. Dried dates from the south, fish wrapped in leaves, a stew so red it looked like blood and fire. Locals watched with suspicion, then tasted, then fought over the last spoonful. New food didn't just feed stomachs, it told stories of deserts, mountains, battles, and escapes. A dish could become a map, a passport, or a bridge between strangers. The tavern didn't serve meals. It served memory. Every bite layered with hunger, history, and hope. And when the last bowl was scraped clean and the mugs drained dry, people leaned back, sighed deeply, and stared at the fire. Full not just of food, but of something older. Something like belonging. The tavern had a voice of its own. It wasn't a single person. It wasn't just the bard. It was a collection of all the noises, murmurs, and forgotten songs that floated between the rafters and settled into the cracks of the floorboards. When the door creaked open and wind pushed through the narrow hall, it carried the music out into the night. But some of it stayed behind, wrapped in soot and memory. You could close your eyes and hear a story, even if no one spoke. At night, when the fire dimmed low and shadows leaned long, someone would always hum. The sound never started loudly. A murmur, a whisper. Then it spread like warmth. The bard would join in if there was one. If not, someone else would. A boy with a voice too big for his chest. A woman with calloused hands and tired eyes. A man who hadn't sung since his brother died. The songs didn't need words. But when they had them, they were often old. Older than memory. Songs of rivers and ruin, of harvest and heartbreak, of waiting. No one asked for requests. The tavern decided. Some nights the songs were fast. Tavern stomping, mug thumping, hand-slapping joys that filled bellies and lifted shoulders. People laughed with their whole bodies. Feet tapped on the ground. Even the cats moved in rhythm. Other nights, the music slowed like rain. A few notes from a broken flute. A hum that sounded like grief. A lullaby for the lonely. These weren't performances, they were offerings. There was an old harp missing 3 strings that still sat in the corner. No one could remember who brought it, but when someone sat down to pluck it, everyone listened. Even the spoons stopped clinking. There was a boy once, barefoot, wide-eyed, trembling fingers. He played one chord and burst into tears. No one laughed, no one clapped. Auntie placed a blanket around his shoulders and said nothing. He stayed the night. By morning, he was gone. But the music wasn't. The walls remembered. Songs soaked into stone. You could trace your finger along a beam and feel rhythm there. People said the tavern moved slightly with music. Wood creaked in harmony. Candles flickered to the beat. There were tales of travelers who entered during a song and never left. Not out of fear, but peace. they found what they didn't know they were looking for, a sound that matched the echo in their chest. Sometimes music solved fights. A man ready to throw a punch would hear a verse from his childhood and freeze. A woman with fire in her eyes would soften at a melody her mother once sang. The keeper understood this. That's why the bard's mug was always full. That's why the lute was always restrung, even if coin was low. The tavern knew that music was medicine, and not always the sweet kind. Sometimes it burned before it healed. There were rituals, too. The same song always played on winter's first snow, another during harvest's end. One only sung when someone passed away in the tavern, quiet, slow, and full of empty space. It had no name, no lyrics, just a tune passed from soul to soul, a farewell wrapped in melody. Kids learned rhythm before words. They banged on tables, mimicked bards, danced on benches. Their laughter became part of the tavern's soundtrack. Not every note was perfect. Not every verse was remembered. But it didn't matter. In the tavern, music wasn't about skill. It was about survival, expression, connection. It was how silence was kept at bay. Instruments came and went. A fiddle cracked from the heat. A drum split in a bar fight. A horn left behind by a soldier who never returned. Each one held fingerprints, memories, moments of joy and sorrow. When they broke, the pieces were kept, hung on walls, placed near the hearth, honored. Even on the quietest nights, when no one sang and no one strummed, the tavern still hummed. The wind through the chimney, the distant bark of a dog, the settling groan of wood. It was all part of the symphony. And when someone new walked in, paused and said, "It's quiet," the regulars smiled. Because they heard what the newcomer couldn't yet, the music beneath the silence. And so the tavern played on. Not through speakers, not through strings, but through stories, shared glances, half-sung memories. A music that belonged to everyone, and no one, and it never truly ended. It only waited for someone brave enough to sing again. The tavern's upper floor creaked like an old man remembering. Every step on the narrow wooden stairs sent a groan through the beams, as if the building itself whispered, "Careful now." Few who drank below ever thought about what rested above. But the rooms upstairs held more than sleep. They held stories no one dared speak aloud. Each door led to a world someone wished to forget, or remember too deeply. No two were the same. Some had windows with cracked panes and drafty corners. Others had none, making morning indistinguishable from midnight. Room 3 smelled of pine and smoke. The mattress, stuffed with old straw and dried herbs, crunched when someone lay down. A widow stayed there every autumn, arriving with the same trunk, same shawl, same silence. She never looked out the window, just sat in the same chair, whispering names to no one. Room 6 had a blood stain under the rug, not fresh, not explained. The rug had been replaced once, then brought back. People complained of bad dreams there, laughter echoing with no source. The keeper never advertised Room 6, but it was always booked. Room 8 was the smallest, barely wide enough for a bed and a candle stand. Yet it was always warm. Travelers said they slept better there than anywhere else, as if the room itself sang them to sleep. No creaks, no chills, no dreams, just rest. And when they left, they often placed a coin in the corner, unasked, unrequired. Something about the room made them feel like they owed it. Some rooms had etchings on the walls, names, tallies, prayers. One had a poem scrawled into the wood near the window, too faded to read but never scrubbed away. Another had a child's drawing scratched into the beam above the bed. A house, a sun, a stick figure with a crown. No one knew who drew it, but guests often left sweets on the sill just in case. Keys hung behind the bar, each one a different shape. The keeper knew which went where by weight alone. No labels, no numbers, only the keeper's memory. If someone asked for a room, the keeper would glance at their eyes, their hands, their silence, and choose accordingly. It wasn't about comfort, it was about need. A grieving father might be sent to the room with the wind chime, a lost girl to the one with heavy curtains. The tavern matched souls to ceilings. The walls upstairs were thinner than they seemed. You could hear weeping through them. Laughter, too. Once, someone heard the sound of a flute playing softly, but no one had brought a flute upstairs. The next day, they said nothing, just paid double and left. And though the floors groaned and roofs sometimes leaked, no guest ever complained. Because those who stayed upstairs knew they were guests not just of a building, but of something older. One room had a mirror that cracked down the center. It still hung, reflecting two versions of everyone who passed. Some swore they looked older in it. Others saw someone else entirely. No one cleaned it, not out of laziness, but out of fear. Because dust hides truth. The sheets were always clean, though no one saw them washed. The candles always new, though the same box was used for years. A chair near the end of the hallway rocked on its own when it rained. Some said a sailor once stayed there and never returned from sea. Others said it was just the draft. But no one sat in it, draft or not. The tavern's upper rooms weren't rooms. They were reflections of fear, of hope, of things left behind and things still chased. Some people came back every year, asking for the same room. Not because it was nice, but because it remembered them. A place where their sorrow fit just right, or their joy didn't seem out of place. And when guests left, some left notes tucked under the pillow. Not for staff, but for the room. Notes of thanks, of regret, of questions never asked aloud. The keeper never read them, just burned them in the hearth, one by one. That's what the tavern did best. Shelter stories, then let them go. At the center of the tavern was the hearth. Not just a fireplace, but a quiet heart that beat without sound. The fire within wasn't always large, sometimes just embers, sometimes a flicker, but it never truly died. Even on warm days, a flame or coal remained, just enough to remind the room it was alive. People gathered around it like moths, drawn not just to warmth, but to something deeper. The fire didn't just burn wood, it burned memory. Each log carried a story. Some brought by guests who swore it came from a special tree. Others taken from old fence posts or broken carts. The fire treated them all the same. It consumed without judgment. Every spark that flew upward was a whisper, every crackle a sigh. Children sat closest, mesmerized by the light. Elders leaned back, watching with eyes that saw more than flames. The hearth had witnessed confessions, reunions, and silent partings. No one spoke loudly near it. Even drunkards lowered their voices. It was a place of softness. The hearth's glow reached farther than any lamp. It filled the room unevenly, casting some faces in gold and others in shadow. People sat for hours without talking, just watching the dance of orange and blue. Sometimes someone would speak, but only in half sentences. He used to sit there, or that fire saved us once. Then fall silent, letting the flames finish the thought. On cold nights, the tavern keeper stoked it more often. using wood that smelled of pine or oak. The scent curled through the room, mixing with ale and stew, memory and music. Some said the fire knew who needed comfort, that it burned brighter near those in pain. One man, soaked from rain, sat by the fire with trembling hands. The flames reached high that night, as if embracing him. By morning, he was gone. But a single coin remained, warm to the touch. No one knew when the hearth was built. The stones were old, smoothed by time and soot. People believed it had always been there, that the tavern was built around it, not the other way around. During storms, when winds howled and windows shook, the hearth stood firm. Its light never wavered. Some claimed to see faces in the flames, not frightening ones, familiar, lost parents, forgotten friends, lovers long buried. Whether true or not, no one laughed at those stories. The hearth earned respect. Ash was never swept completely. A thin layer remained, like memory. Children drew symbols in it when adults weren't looking. Sometimes those drawings weren't erased, even after the night ended. A flower, a sun, a handprint. The keeper never explained why, only smiled and added another log. There were nights the fire burned green. A traveler once tossed in a pouch of spices, and for a moment the flames changed color. People gasped, then clapped, then grew quiet again. The hearth didn't like being made into a spectacle. It calmed, shrinking back to red and orange. One guest claimed the fire was a living thing, older than any of them, wiser than any bard. That it remembered every story ever told beside it. The keeper didn't disagree. When the tavern emptied and chairs were stacked and mugs cleaned, someone always sat near the fire before sleep. Just for a minute. Just to say goodnight. It didn't matter who. A cook, a guest, the keeper. The hearth was never alone. And in the morning, when the coals glowed faintly and smoke curled into the beams, new guests arrived. They didn't know what the fire had heard the night before, but they felt it. The hush in the room. The way people moved near the hearth with care. Some leaned close and whispered dreams into it. Others touched the stone for luck. No one walked by without noticing. Because the hearth wasn't just warmth, it was witness. In every tavern, there are chairs no one chooses, because they are already chosen. Not by people, but by time, by memory, by the weight of presence left behind. In this tavern, there were 7 such chairs. Old, scratched, some with missing pieces, but always exactly where they had always been. The keeper never moved them. Cleaned around them, yes. Repaired them when they split, but never shifted them from their place. Even during renovations, the floorboards beneath them stayed untouched, as if those chairs had roots. The first was near the window. A short-legged stool, too low for most, but perfect for a child. No one remembered a child ever sitting there. But sometimes sweets appeared on the sill next to it. Candied nuts, dry figs, a folded drawing. No one ever claimed them. The second chair was by the hearth, high-backed, carved with vines. A fisherman once sat there every night for years. He never spoke, just nodded at the fire. After he passed, no one dared take that seat. One traveler tried. They left halfway through their drink, eyes glassy. It wasn't the fire, they said. It was the silence. Chair 3 sat alone at a round table in the back corner. It creaked when empty, but never made a sound when sat on. A one-eyed woman claimed it helped her remember her brother's voice. She returned every spring, ordered the same drink, and toasted to the ceiling. The fourth was the loudest chair in the tavern. Any movement made it groan like thunder. People joked about it, called it the Grumbler, but no one laughed while sitting in it. One guest stood up mid-meal and walked out, whispering, "That chair knew my regrets." Chair 5 was always warm, no matter the season. A bard once played a tune there and claimed the seat hummed in harmony. He gifted the tavern a song in return, soft, slow, and unfinished. The melody played only on rainy days, and only if someone sat there without speaking. The 6th was broken, leg uneven, back tilted, and yet it was never empty. A shadow always seemed to sit there. Not a ghost, just a sense. If you passed by, you'd feel watched, but not judged. The kind of watchfulness that came from care, not threat. And then there was the 7th, by the door, simple, worn, facing out, not in, meant for departures, not arrivals. Soldiers sat there before leaving. Lovers sat there while waiting. Sometimes strangers walked in, sat in that chair for a single drink, and walked out forever changed. The keeper said nothing. The guests never explained. But every time the door opened and wind blew past, the chair rocked just slightly, as if nodding farewell. Not all chairs in the tavern held stories, but the ones that did held them tightly. They absorbed voices, soaked up laughter, anchored memory. Some guests whispered thanks to them. Others placed coins beneath their legs or tied threads around their arms. Rituals made without instruction. Meaning made from habit. One child tied a bell to chair 3 once. It never rang. The next morning, it was gone. New guests sometimes tried to rearrange things. "This would be better over there," they'd say. The keeper would nod politely and put everything back after they left. It wasn't stubbornness, it was reverence. These weren't just chairs. They were listeners, and in a place full of sound, that mattered. Each chair had a name, though they were never written down. The staff knew them by feel. "Fetch the mug near Old Pine," the cook might say, or "Sweep around quiet back." The chairs didn't respond, of course, but somehow the room did. Lights dimmed near certain seats. Shadows moved slower. Dust gathered slower. So next time you enter a tavern, look twice at where you sit. If the chair feels too comfortable too soon, ask yourself, who sat here before you? What words were spoken into its wood? What memories cling to its grain? Because some chairs don't just support weight. They carry legacies, and they're waiting not for someone new, but someone worthy. Behind the swinging door of the tavern, the kitchen breathed like a living soul. It wasn't just a place to cook, it was a sanctuary where flame and memory met in silence. Pans hung from iron hooks, always clinking slightly even when the air was still, as if remembering old meals. The walls were stained with stories. Generations had cooked here. No paint ever lasted. Steam and smoke always peeled it away, revealing a softer truth underneath. The cook, a quiet man named Relin, wore an apron older than most guests. Its pockets held cloves, chalk, dried lavender, a stone from a mountain he'd never climbed. He didn't follow recipes. He listened. To the sizzle of oil, the hum of the kettle, the ache in a traveler's shoulders. Meals weren't made. They were felt. Bread for sorrow. Soup for silence. Stew for waiting. Each dish had a soul, and no one left the table untouched by it. There was a shelf in the corner that leaned to one side, crammed with glass jars. Some had clear labels: thyme, coriander, smoked salt. Others were marked with things like "for courage" or "against dreams." One jar simply read, "Her laugh." It was nearly empty. A young maid once asked what was inside. Relin answered, "Only what's needed." She never asked again, but she did add a pinch to her tea the next morning, and smiled wider than ever before. The pantry had no lock, yet everyone stepped inside as if entering a sacred space. Hanging garlic, root vegetables in baskets, burlap sacks of barley. A tiny jar glowed faintly in the back. No light hit it, yet it shone. Relin never touched it. It was only for emergencies, he said. What kind, no one knew. But during a thunderstorm once, when a frightened child refused to eat, Relin stirred a drop into his porridge. The boy slept peacefully, clutching his bowl. No clocks hung in the kitchen. Time passed by the rising of dough and the color of broth. When the shadows near the chopping block shifted, it was time for baking. When the window steamed up without boiling anything, the guests would soon arrive. On rare nights, the fire in the stove would flicker blue. That meant sorrow was near. Relin would boil elderflower and hang cinnamon in the air. Sadness couldn't survive sweet heat. The oven door had initials scratched into it. No one alive knew whose they were. But when someone cried nearby, the metal warmed to the touch. A little boy once hugged it. He said it sounded like someone breathing inside. He wasn't afraid, just comforted. People began leaving folded paper near it. Notes, drawings, sometimes dried flowers. Relin never read them, but each morning they were gone. Dinner service was a ballet of motion, the clang of ladles, soft whistles, quiet chants of the line cooks, old rhymes about onions and luck. One cook swore by tapping her spoon 3 times before stirring. Another only chopped with her left hand. Relin said nothing, but he watched. He remembered. When someone lost a parent, he placed a cinnamon bun at their place. No charge, no comment. There were no accidents in the kitchen, only stories misheard. A burned roast once turned into the tavern's most popular soup. A spilled spice became tradition. One year, on the darkest night of winter, a power outage left only candlelight and cold ingredients. Relin made a meal from scraps, and every guest wept. Not from hunger, from recognition. They said it tasted like their oldest memory. At night, when everyone had gone, Relin would pour a single glass of cider, set it on the empty windowsill, and whisper a name. No one knew whose. But in the morning, the glass was always empty, and the scent of apples lingered. Some believed the kitchen fed more than hunger, that it fed memory, grief, longing, that it whispered comfort not with words but warmth. And those who entered, tired, left whole. Not filled, not fixed, but gently rearranged. Like a chair pulled closer to the fire, or a blanket smoothed without asking. That was the kitchen's gift. Not flavor, not fame, but the feeling that something knew your silence and answered with kindness. The walls of the old tavern were more than wood and stone. They were listeners, watchers, quiet keepers of time. Each dent, each stain, each fading patch of color told a story someone had tried to forget. Some walls bowed slightly inward, as if leaning closer to hear. Others stood firm, holding back secrets only the night knew. But none were blank. Even where the paint peeled, it peeled in patterns. Faces, maps, old wounds. Nails rusted into their surface, holding up lanterns or frames long since vanished. A single horseshoe still hung on the north beam. No one remembered who placed it there, but the staff never touched it. "It stays," the barkeep once said, "because the door still closes right." Dust gathered in corners like old regrets. A handprint appeared on a back wall every winter, same shape, same size, then vanished come spring. Some said it was the ghost of a boy who once sang for coins near the stove. Others believed it was memory itself, reaching out. Carvings filled the baseboards, not initials, but symbols. Moons, eyes, stars, teeth. A traveling scholar once spent hours sketching them, claiming they were the markings of an ancient dialect. But when he tried to translate, all he got was, "We watched." He left before finishing his drink. Others added to the wall in quieter ways. Penciled poems, tucked notes behind loose boards, initials scratched under tables. Not vandalism, reverence. Like prayers whispered to something that couldn't speak back, but always heard. One wall near the back stairs had water stains that looked like wings. They appeared after a heavy rain years ago and never left. A musician claimed they moved when he played. A maid once swore she heard them rustle while dusting. No one else confirmed it, but no one doubted it either. Sometimes truth isn't in what's seen, but in how many believe without proof. The fireplace wall bore heat marks from decades of stories. One blackened patch was never cleaned. It marked the night of the kitchen fire. Everyone survived, but the scorch remained as a reminder. A child once asked why it wasn't painted over. The keeper smiled. Because some memories must be seen to be honored. Every wall had that kind of scar. Quiet, dignified, irremovable. One corner of the tavern always smelled of smoke, even when no candles were lit. Another had a faint echo, as if it remembered every song sung beside it. A guest once whispered a goodbye into a crack between the boards. The next morning, a flower had grown there. Thin, yellow, fragile. It stayed one day, then wilted. The barkeep pressed it into the tavern ledger. The page remains. Sometimes, when the tavern was closed, the staff sat in silence, backs against those ancient walls. They said it helped them think, helped them remember, helped them forget. One woman claimed the wall hummed when her father passed. Another swore she felt it warm after she forgave her brother. These weren't things walls should do. But then again, this wasn't just any tavern. The ceiling above had a beam with names scratched faintly along its length. Too high for any ladder. Too perfect in spacing. No one had ever seen anyone writing there, but every year one new name appeared. Always of someone lost. Never announced. Just present. The keeper nodded when asked. We don't write them. The walls do. A tale was told of a man who stood for hours with his forehead resting against a west-facing plank. When asked what he was doing, he said, "Listening to my mother say goodnight." He left without paying. The staff didn't stop him. So, when you sit in this tavern, let your hand brush the surface behind you. Feel the bumps, the grooves, the breath of time beneath your fingertips. You may not understand the language these walls speak, but they understand you, and they've been waiting longer than you can imagine. The tavern's staircase creaked like an old storyteller, never loud, but always present. It curved gently to the left, made from uneven steps of dark oak, worn soft at the center by hundreds of feet, heavy boots, hurried heels, and silent socks. No two steps sounded the same. One groaned, another sighed, a third barely a whisper, and every sound was part of a rhythm the tavern knew by heart. At the base of the stairs, a brass knob waited on the railing, cold in summer, warm in winter. People touched it without thinking, but some felt a jolt. Not electric, emotional, as if it remembered them. Some even claimed it pulsed under their hand like a heartbeat. A woman once froze with her palm on it, eyes wide. When she returned, she said, "I remembered my father's voice." She never explained more. Halfway up, a step always seemed taller than the rest. Not by much, just enough to make you notice. Children tripped there and laughed. Adults stumbled and looked back. One old man kissed it once, saying, "That's where I said yes. No one asked to what." The walls beside the staircase changed color with the light. By day, they seemed pale and cracked, but at twilight, they glowed soft amber, like candlelit parchment. Shadows formed shapes that felt familiar, shoulders of someone you knew, the hem of a dress from a dream, the curve of a forgotten promise. A guest once claimed the stairwell painted memories in light. Another guest never used the stairs again. A single picture hung on the wall, an oil painting of a bridge at dusk. No signature, just brush strokes like whispers. When dusted, it seemed to shimmer briefly. A child once pointed and said, "That's where my dreams go." The staff never moved it. At the top of the stairs, the landing held 3 doors. Only one was ever locked, but no one questioned it. Behind the middle door was a narrow hallway with faded rugs and crooked paintings. The rooms themselves were simple. Beds, lamps, windows that opened to nothing. Yet guests returned with stories. "I slept with the moon inside my chest," said one. Another claimed to hear lullabies in the walls. One woman woke weeping and could only say, "She forgave me." No staff ever entered unless invited. That was the rule. One step, just one, held a secret. It creaked twice even when no one stepped on it. Once in the evening, once at dawn, always the same note. The cook called it the tavern's heartbeat. "As long as it sings," he said, "this place breathes." A musician tried to record it, but on playback the sound was gone, replaced by something that resembled wind in old trees. Guests often stood at the foot of the staircase, unsure, as if climbing meant more than reaching a room, as if the steps demanded something, memory, longing, maybe truth. A girl once sat on the 3rd stair all night, eyes closed, holding a folded letter. In the morning, she left it under the 6th step. No one ever found it again. Sometimes, when the tavern was empty, the stairs creaked on their own, slowly, carefully, as if someone long gone was making their way back down. The staff never looked. They just nodded toward the sound and whispered, "Safe travels." And so, when you place your foot on the 1st step, listen. Let your weight settle. Let the wood know you. Because this staircase is not just a way up. It's a way in, into memory, into mystery, into stories waiting to unfold, not in the room above, but in the quiet between steps. In the farthest, quietest corner of the tavern stood a narrow window that most guests never noticed. It was tall, curved slightly at the top, and framed by old wooden beams that had darkened with age. This window was not meant for looking out onto anything beautiful. It overlooked only a broken courtyard, where cracked stones lay scattered beneath a crooked iron pump that hadn't worked in years. There was no garden, no path, no charm. And yet, this window had more visitors than any painting or portrait in the building. The glass was never fully clear. It was not dirty nor clean, just fogged by something deep within it. Not moisture, not dust. Something more like memory. Even when wiped, the fog remained, as if the window refused to forget. On some days, when the light hit just right, it looked like a second world was trapped inside the glass. Not a reflection, a place, a moment. Sometimes a meadow, sometimes a figure. Once, someone claimed to see their childhood home. Another guest claimed they saw a version of themselves, older, thinner, sitting alone beneath a tree that no longer existed. At sunrise, the window glowed gold. Not just the light passing through it, but the frame itself. pulsing faintly like a heartbeat in slow motion. No matter how overcast the sky was, the light came, and no one could explain how. Some thought the wood had absorbed sunlight over the decades and released it slowly. Others whispered that the window remembered every dawn it had seen and played them back, one by one. The tavern owner, an old man named Carwin, once told a story about the window. He said it had been brought from another town, salvaged from a house that burned down but left the frame untouched. Fire ate the walls, the roof, the floor, he said, but not this, not the glass. The flames danced around it like they were afraid. He never said where the house was, only that someone had been watching from the other side and never stopped. Guests who sat near the window claimed to feel a chill along their spine, but it was never unpleasant. It was the kind of chill you get when someone says your name softly, or when a song you forgot returns in a dream. One woman said she remembered a moment from childhood while staring through it, her mother brushing her hair, humming a tune. She wept, quietly, and whispered thanks to the glass. The staff noticed strange things too. Once they left a candle on the sill overnight. In the morning, the wax had not melted, though it had clearly burned. Another time, a moth sat beside the glass for 3 full days, unmoving. No one asked to what. The walls beside the staircase changed color with the light. By day, they seemed pale and cracked, but at twilight, they glowed soft amber, like candlelit parchment. Shadows formed shapes that felt familiar, shoulders of someone you knew, the hem of a dress from a dream, the curve of a forgotten promise. A guest once claimed the stairwell painted memories in light. Another guest never used the stairs again. A single picture hung on the wall, an oil painting of a bridge at dusk. No signature, just brush strokes like whispers. When dusted, it seemed to shimmer briefly. A child once pointed and said, "That's where my dreams go." The staff never moved it. At the top of the stairs, the landing held 3 doors. Only one was ever locked, but no one questioned it. Behind the middle door was a narrow hallway with faded rugs and crooked paintings. The rooms themselves were simple. Beds, lamps, windows that opened to nothing. Yet guests returned with stories. "I slept with the moon inside my chest," said one. Another claimed to hear lullabies in the walls. One woman woke weeping and could only say, "She forgave me." No staff ever entered unless invited. That was the rule. One step, just one, held a secret. It creaked twice even when no one stepped on it. Once in the evening, once at dawn, always the same note. The cook called it the tavern's heartbeat. "As long as it sings," he said, "this place breathes." A musician tried to record it, but on playback the sound was gone, replaced by something that resembled wind in old trees. Guests often stood at the foot of the staircase, unsure, as if climbing meant more than reaching a room, as if the steps demanded something, memory, longing, maybe truth. A girl once sat on the 3rd stair all night, eyes closed, holding a folded letter. In the morning, she left it under the 6th step. No one ever found it again. Sometimes, when the tavern was empty, the stairs creaked on their own, slowly, carefully, as if someone long gone was making their way back down. The staff never looked. They just nodded toward the sound and whispered, "Safe travels." And so, when you place your foot on the 1st step, listen. Let your weight settle. Let the wood know you. Because this staircase is not just a way up. It's a way in, into memory, into mystery, into stories waiting to unfold, not in the room above, but in the quiet between steps. In the farthest, quietest corner of the tavern stood a narrow window that most guests never noticed. It was tall, curved slightly at the top, and framed by old wooden beams that had darkened with age. This window was not meant for looking out onto anything beautiful. It overlooked only a broken courtyard, where cracked stones lay scattered beneath a crooked iron pump that hadn't worked in years. There was no garden, no path, no charm. And yet, this window had more visitors than any painting or portrait in the building. The glass was never fully clear. It was not dirty nor clean, just fogged by something deep within it. Not moisture, not dust. Something more like memory. Even when wiped, the fog remained, as if the window refused to forget. On some days, when the light hit just right, it looked like a second world was trapped inside the glass. Not a reflection, a place, a moment. Sometimes a meadow, sometimes a figure. Once, someone claimed to see their childhood home. Another guest claimed they saw a version of themselves, older, thinner, sitting alone beneath a tree that no longer existed. At sunrise, the window glowed gold. Not just the light passing through it, but the frame itself, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat in slow motion. No matter how overcast the sky was, the light came. And no one could explain how. Some thought the wood had absorbed sunlight over the decades and released it slowly. Others whispered that the window remembered every dawn it had seen and played them back, one by one. The tavern owner, an old man named Carwin, once told a story about the window. He said it had been brought from another town, salvaged from a house that burned down but left the frame untouched. Fire ate the walls, the roof, the floor, he said, but not this, not the glass. The flames danced around it like they were afraid. He never said where the house was, only that someone had been watching from the other side and never stopped. Guests who sat near the window claimed to feel a chill along their spine, but it was never unpleasant. It was the kind of chill you get when someone says your name softly, or when a song you forgot returns in a dream. One woman said she remembered a moment from childhood while staring through it, her mother brushing her hair, humming a tune. She wept, quietly, and whispered thanks to the glass. The staff noticed strange things too. Once, they left a candle on the sill overnight. In the morning, the wax had not melted, though it had clearly burned. Another time, a moth sat beside the glass for 3 full days, unmoving. It needs to breathe, they'd say, and keep wiping down glasses. Carwin once found a note in the drawer. Not the old, folded one, it was new. Crisp paper, ink still wet. 3 words, "You are forgiven." He never spoke of who wrote it or what it meant, but he locked the tavern early that night, lit a candle, and sat by the fireplace for hours, unmoving. The next day, he placed a fresh flower in a jar near the drawer. No one asked why. The key inside the drawer didn't match any lock in the tavern, but it was heavy, cold, and clearly ancient. Its teeth were jagged, almost broken. Carwin theorized that it wasn't meant to unlock something physical, but something older, something forgotten. It's not a tool, he told a curious guest. It's a reminder of what we once tried to close. No one dared steal from the drawer, not out of fear, but respect. Even thieves left it alone. One night, during a busy festival, someone new attempted to pocket the ribbon. Before they reached the door, they slipped, hard. Broke their wrist on the floorboards. The ribbon? Already back in the drawer, untouched. The drawer didn't glow. It didn't speak. It didn't punish, but it saw. It knew, and it remembered. So if you ever find yourself behind the bar, reaching for a rag or glass, and your hand brushes the cool brass handle, pause. Ask yourself what you're hiding, what you've left unsaid. And listen. If the drawer stays closed, you're safe. But if it opens, even slightly, then something you buried is ready to return. In the upper attic of the tavern, where no guests were allowed and few staff even dared venture, there lay a thick blanket of dust. It covered everything. Crates filled with forgotten bottles, broken stools, old ledgers, cracked mirrors. But this dust was not ordinary. It didn't settle the way normal dust did. It didn't just rest. It drifted, slowly, silently, without wind, without cause, without disturbance. It danced in the air like memory taking shape. Carwin, the tavern keeper, said it had always been that way. He claimed even when he was a boy, long before he took over the tavern, the attic dust had patterns, swirls that looked like fingerprints, trails that curved around objects, sometimes in perfect spirals. Once, he said, he walked in and saw a name written in the dust, his mother's name. She had passed the week before. He didn't wipe it away. He left it, and over time the letters gently faded, one by one, as if the attic mourned with him. The staff left the attic alone, not from fear, but from reverence. It was a quiet space, colder than the floors below, yet not unpleasant. There was a silence up there that didn't exist anywhere else in the building. A thick, sacred kind of quiet, like the hush of a forest before snow. Sometimes someone would go up to fetch something, and when they came down, they'd be different. More thoughtful, more distant. One girl cried without knowing why. Another boy smiled and whispered, "I saw them again." The dust responded to emotion. That's what Carwin believed. If someone entered the attic with grief, it would part for them, clearing small pathways in curving lines. If they entered with guilt, it formed rings around their feet, as if circling the burden they carried. Once, during a storm, lightning hit a nearby tree, and the entire tavern shook. When Carwin checked the attic afterward, every surface was spotless, except for one word scrawled across the floorboards. Wait. There were no windows in the attic, no drafts, no open vents. Yet every day, around noon, the dust would shimmer and lift slightly, as if stirred by a breeze that wasn't there. Sometimes in that shimmer, people claimed to see things. Not ghosts exactly, but echoes. A woman braiding someone's hair. A child sleeping on crates. A man reading a letter over and over. The dust didn't just float, it remembered. Guests never knew about it, but their names occasionally appeared. One time, after a man left in tears from the bar, Carwin found the name Samuel, written neatly across an old ledger up there. Another time, a dog that often lay near the tavern door passed away, and that night, paw prints appeared in the dust, trailing from one end of the attic to the other, stopping beside an old blanket. The attic contained no secrets in boxes, no treasures in trunks. It was the dust itself that held the stories. Carwin sometimes went up alone, with a candle in hand, and simply sat. He said it helped him remember. Not things he had forgotten, but things he never knew he missed. One night, after a long silence, he found a single line written near the stairs. "You did your best." He cried for the first time in years. The dust never appeared downstairs, not even when wind rushed through open doors. It respected its boundary. Its realm was above, in the stillness, in the place where stories no longer had to be spoken aloud. A carpenter once offered to clean it, to sand and sweep and polish the attic floor. Carwin refused. "It's not a mess," he said. "It's memory in motion." One staff member once tried to bring a camera up. He wanted to document the strange patterns. When he returned, the camera refused to turn on. Its battery had drained completely, though it was full before. He opened the photo roll. Every frame was blank, except one. A faint image of a face, not smiling, not frowning, just looking. So if you ever walk past the stairwell at the back of the tavern and feel a strange coolness along your neck, know that the attic is breathing. Not watching, not judging, just remembering. And if one day you climb the steps and enter the dust-filled silence, leave your thoughts behind. The dust already knows them. Hung in the narrow hallway between the tavern's kitchen and storage room, a single painting rested on the faded wall. Its frame was wooden, blackened with age and chipped in places. The image showed a modest countryside scene, an empty cart under a tree with a narrow dirt path leading toward low hills. At first glance it looked like nothing more than a quaint decoration. But that painting, it never faded. Unlike the others on the tavern walls, which grew dusty and dim with time, this one remained vivid. The green of the tree stayed rich, the shadows on the cart sharp, the sky tinged with a persistent warmth. Over the years, staff tried to clean it, dust it, even move it. But the painting wouldn't shift. It wouldn't dull. It simply held on, unmoving, unchanging, untouched by time. Carwin, the barkeep, once asked an art dealer about it. The dealer said the style didn't match any known painter. The brush strokes were precise, but inconsistent. Some lines looked ancient, others modern. The canvas had no signature. When they tried to remove it from the wall, the nail snapped cleanly in half. No sound, no resistance. The painting didn't even tilt. Staff said strange things happened near it. A waiter once paused to tie his shoe and heard a soft creaking, like wooden wheels turning slowly on gravel. Another time, someone claimed they saw movement, the shadow of a figure walking down the path in the painting, only to vanish when looked at directly. Carwin dismissed it as fatigue. "Long shifts play tricks," he said. But even he stopped looking at the painting too long. New employees were always warned, don't touch the painting, don't speak to it. And if you ever feel like the wind in the hallway is blowing from the canvas, walk away. One night, during a blackout, the tavern plunged into darkness. Candles were lit, guests huddled in booths, and down the hallway the painting glowed faintly. Not bright, just enough to be seen, a warm outline of the tree, the cart, the path. Carwin walked toward it and stopped 3 feet short. He felt a strange pull, like gravity bending. The air grew thicker. He whispered, "Who are you?" but received no answer. Only silence, and then the glow faded. A curious staff member once tried to paint over it. They brought a fresh canvas, new paint, and carefully began to replicate the scene. When they were finished, they placed the replica beside the original. The next morning, the replica was blank. Not white, not erased, but blank, as though it had never been painted on at all. The staff member quit a week later. Some say the painting shows a memory that belongs to no one living. Others think it's a door, a frozen view through something that once was, or might still be. Once, a guest stood before it for 10 full minutes, unmoving. When Carwin asked if they were all right, the guest simply said, "That cart's still waiting," then left without explanation. No one has ever seen anyone approach the cart in the image. No animals, no humans. But sometimes, dust gathers at the foot of the wall beneath it in curved lines, as if someone stepped in or out. Carwin once found a piece of dry hay there. He swept it up without comment. Even when renovations were done to the hallway, the wall holding the painting was left untouched. No one dared drill near it. No one painted around it. The painting remained, observing silently, still as ever. Its colors bold, its shadows fresh, its meaning uncertain. So, if you pass down that hallway and your footsteps slow, listen. Not for voices, but for wheels, for wind, for that quiet pull beneath your ribs. The painting won't move, but it just might remember you. In the back kitchen of the tavern, resting in a dented metal drawer beneath the sink, lay an old wooden spoon. No engravings, no markings, just worn grain smoothed by time and countless meals. It wasn't used anymore, not because it was broken or misplaced, but because it moved on its own. It started simply enough. A faint clatter in the night, the drawer opening slightly without a draft. Carwin, who stayed late counting coins or closing books, began to notice. He'd glance over his shoulder and see the spoon resting still. But each time he returned later, its position had shifted. Once turned sideways, once upright. Then, one night, he walked in to find the spoon standing straight in a dry bowl, slowly spinning in circles, stirring nothing but air. They tried locking the drawer. The spoon still appeared on the counter by morning. Staff grew uneasy. New hires were told not to mention it. "Just leave it where it rests," Carwin would say. "It finds its place again." One tried throwing it out. The next day, the trash can was empty, and the spoon sat back in its drawer, a smudge of ash on its handle. No one remembered who first brought the spoon in. It had simply always been there, tucked among the metal tools and worn ladles. But it refused replacement. Whenever someone introduced a new spoon, sleek, modern, metal, the wooden one would rest beside it the next morning, always slightly angled, as if watching. Carwin once let a local historian examine it. The man held it, turned it, tapped it gently. "This isn't just old," he murmured. "It remembers heat." Asked to explain, he didn't, just handed it back and left. That night, the spoon stirred again, this time in a pot of untouched broth. The kitchen workers began to treat it like a quiet resident. Some greeted it with a nod. One baker whispered thanks before every shift. It never harmed anyone, never flew or shook or glowed, but it responded. If someone wept nearby, the spoon tilted, as if bowing. If laughter rang, it lay still. But in anger, sharp voices, slammed pans, it would tap, just once. A soft, clear knock against metal. A warning. During a storm, the roof leaked above the stove. Water dripped onto the counter. When the staff returned in the morning, the leak was still there, but the spoon had moved. It lay at the center of the counter, beneath the largest drip, its bowl upturned to catch water. By midday, the leak had stopped. And the spoon? Dry. One festival night, when the tavern was full and Carwin too busy to notice, a guest wandered into the kitchen. Drunk and joking, he picked up the spoon and mocked the stories. "Ghost cook, stir me a drink," he laughed. The lights flickered. Pots clattered. The guest tripped and fell. No injury. But when he stood, the spoon was gone. It returned to the drawer 3 nights later, clean but silent. The spoon never showed signs of damage. Its wood never cracked. Even near fire, it stayed cool. One curious cook placed it in the boiling water once. It didn't float. It rested at the bottom, unmoving. When retrieved, it was still warm, not hot, and the water around it smelled faintly of thyme, though no herbs had been added. A child once visited the kitchen with a staff member. The child reached for the spoon without fear. It turned slightly toward her, just an inch. She giggled and said, "It's shy." That night, she left a candy beside it. In the morning, the wrapper remained. The candy was gone. Some believe the spoon belonged to a woman who once cooked for the tavern, long before Carwin's time. A woman who stirred soups and sauces with quiet patience, who whispered recipes to pots and never wrote them down. They say she passed on during winter, and the spoon stayed, stirring the memory of her presence. So now it rests in its drawer, or on the counter, or inside a pot that no one touched. Always returning, always watching, always remembering. If you see it move, don't panic, don't speak, just let it stir. Whatever it's mixing isn't meant to be interrupted. Above the tavern's second floor, tucked at the far end of a quiet hallway, was a small square window. It faced nothing remarkable, just the edge of the woods and a narrow dirt trail lined with grass. No grand views, no impressive sunsets. Yet that window, it never stayed closed. Carwin, who'd inherited the tavern from his uncle, had nailed it shut once. Not out of fear, but frustration. Cold air would creep in during the night, even with the latch turned. Curtains would stir softly even when the rest of the tavern sat in perfect stillness. "It's old wood," he'd mutter. "Things shift." But when the nails were driven in and the window stayed shut for 3 nights, something odd happened. On the 4th night, the hallway filled with the scent of pine, sharp and fresh. There were no pine trees nearby. The air turned thick, and when Carwin passed by the window, all 6 nails had worked their way free, straight, unbent, lying neatly on the floor. The window stood ajar, just enough for wind to hum through the opening like a whisper. Guests staying in the upstairs rooms spoke of dreams. Not nightmares, not visions, just strange dreams that left a taste of memory behind. One man said he dreamt of walking through fog, a lantern in hand, toward a window that glowed with warm light. Another woman woke with dew on her hands, though the room was dry. They had all stayed in rooms near the end of the hallway. Once, a carpenter replaced the frame. Brand new hinges, fresh wood, tight seal. For a week, it held firm. But then, on the 7th day, the glass fogged from the inside. No one had been in the hallway.
Yet there it was, a single palm print, small, almost childlike, pressed on the inside. The carpenter never returned. The window wasn't dangerous. It didn't slam or shatter. It didn't creak ominously. It just opened. Even on windless nights. Even when locked. One guest watched it drift open slowly while she wrote in her journal. "It's not trying to escape," she later said. "It's inviting something in." Staff tried covering it. Heavy drapes, nailed boards, even paint. Nothing lasted. The coverings would slip, nails fall, paint peel away in perfect circles. Eventually, they left it alone. The window stayed bare. No curtain, no covering, just a clear view of the woods and the empty trail. One autumn evening, a child pointed up at the window from outside. "She's waving," the child said, "the lady in grey." But when the adults looked, the window was empty. Inside, Carwin found no footprints, no open doors, just the faint echo of laughter in a silent hall. On cold nights, the window never frosted over. Even when others did, it stayed clear, as if warmed from the outside. And sometimes, passers-by claimed they saw a candle flickering near it. But no candles were lit on the upper floor. No one stayed in the end room anymore. The room beside the window had long been empty. Not out of superstition, but because no guest ever completed a stay there. They'd request to move or leave early, citing uneasy dreams or strange knocks. One man claimed he heard tapping at the window despite being on the inside. Another said he saw writing appear in the condensation. Still waiting. Carwin never closed the window again after that. He let it be. Sometimes it would open wide enough to let a leaf drift in. Other times, just a crack wide enough to catch the scent of distant rain. Once, it opened fully in the dead of winter, and yet the room remained warm. Not fire warm, memory warm. One stormy night, lightning flashed across the sky. Thunder rolled, the power flickered, and in that flash, a figure stood at the window, barely visible, still, calm. When Carwin rushed, to the hallway there was no one, only the window, gently swinging shut on its own. He left a single chair by it after that, just in case, he said. Someone might need to rest a moment. Every so often that chair would be turned slightly, never where he left it. Facing, toward the trail, toward whatever, or whoever, had once walked away. So now, if you ever pass through the hallway late at night and feel the air shift, pause. Look to the window. If it's open, don't be afraid. Just nod. Something old might be passing through, a whisper, a watcher, a walk that never truly ended. In the far corner of the tavern's basement, behind crates of unused jars and a shelf stacked with dusty vinegar bottles, stood an old grandfather clock. It had no pendulum, no chime, and its glass front was cracked. But still, the hands moved, not forward, as expected, but slowly, deliberately, backward. Carwin found it years ago, wedged into the wall like it had grown from it. He never remembered placing it there, nor did his uncle, who owned the tavern before him. It wasn't listed in any inventory or mentioned in any renovations. It simply was, and had always been, it seemed. At first, he thought the hands were stuck. But when checked again, hours later, they had moved in reverse. It didn't keep time in the usual sense. The hours didn't match the sun, and the minutes didn't tick regularly. But the hands never stopped. They spun backward in silence, counting towards something no one understood. One electrician attempted to repair it. He opened the back and found nothing inside, no gears, no coils, just emptiness. He laughed and closed it up. The next morning, the electrician called in, sick. He never returned. Carwin never asked why. The tavern staff learned to ignore the clock. But sometimes when they passed through the basement, they'd glance at it and feel suddenly nostalgic. Not for a specific memory, but for time itself. One waiter swore that after standing before the clock for 5 minutes, he remembered his grandmother's kitchen in perfect detail, though she had died when he was a child. A cook once heard soft ticking, though the clock made no sound. She followed it and found herself weeping before the clock face, unsure why. "I don't remember what I lost," she said, "but I felt it." The numbers on the face were Roman, but slightly off. The IV was scratched into a V and rewritten. The X appeared twice. No one could explain it. Yet guests who wandered down by accident, looking for a quiet spot or a shortcut, often paused before it, hypnotized. One man stood there for nearly an hour. When asked why, he replied, "I was listening to yesterday." On stormy nights, when the wind howled and the tavern lights flickered, the clock glowed faintly, a soft pulse behind the cracked glass. Not bright, just enough to be noticed. And on such nights, Carwin found items in the basement moved, not stolen, just reordered. A candle, once placed upright, now lay on its side, surrounded by dry lavender. A broken plate mended and resting neatly beside the wall. They say the clock doesn't show you time, it shows you memory. One bartender believed that if you stared long enough, it would begin to count backward through your own life. That you could trace your regrets like constellations. She only looked once. Then never returned to the basement again. One day, a child wandered down, chasing a ball. She stood before the clock, silent. Her parents found her smiling gently, hand pressed to the glass. "It's going slow now," she whispered. "It knows I'm not ready." The basement door was later locked, not out of fear, but to honor something sacred. The clock still ticks backward, slowly, steadily, not toward midnight, not toward noon, but to some quiet moment before everything changed. So now when someone asks about the basement, Carwin simply nods. "There's nothing down there you need," he says, "unless you've forgotten something important." And if one day you hear a soft ticking behind a door you didn't notice before, pause, breathe, let the moment pass, because some clocks don't measure time, they measure loss, and some memories prefer to be counted in reverse. It was just a painting, hung above the mantel in room 3 of the tavern's east wing, surrounded by faded wallpaper and a wooden clock that hadn't ticked in years. The portrait showed a man, middle-aged, dark coat, calm eyes, a slight tilt of the chin. No nameplate, no artist's signature, just there. Carwin didn't know when it had been hung. It wasn't on the old checklists from his uncle's time, and no one ever recalled buying it. But the room always had the painting. Guests who stayed there mentioned it casually. "The man in the painting looks serious," they'd say. Or, "He makes the room feel watched." One even joked, "I think he judged me when I spilled tea." Then came the night of the thunderstorm. A guest, older, soft-spoken, travelling, alone, booked room 3. He checked in early, left for dinner, and returned just as the rain began. Hours passed. The tavern quieted. The wind howled. And then came the scream. Not loud, just sharp enough to cut the quiet. Carwin rushed upstairs. The door to room 3 stood open. The guest sat on the edge of the bed, pale and trembling. "I saw it," he whispered. His eyes closed, then opened. "I swear." The portrait? Unchanged. Same calm face. Same painted gaze. But something felt tighter. The air in the room had a weight to it. Carwin dismissed it gently, offered the guest another room. But after that night, rumours spread. A week later, the maid refused to clean room 3 alone. "Sometimes," she said, "the frame feels warm." Another time, a guest claimed, the man's gaze followed her as she moved. Others noticed nothing. But those who did remembered. One curious staff member took a photo. The image printed fine. But when zoomed in, the man's pupils were slightly off-center, looking just to the left. In the real painting, they faced straight ahead. The staff member deleted the photo. The phone glitched for 3 days after. A historian once visited, intrigued by the rumors. He brought tools, scanned the painting, even held a magnifier up close. "It's not paint," he murmured. "It's watching through the paint." He didn't explain further. He left that evening, skipping his reservation. Still, Carwin didn't remove the portrait. He believed in letting the tavern hold its secrets. So room 3 remained open, rarely booked, never forced. Guests who stayed there were never warned, but every so often someone asked quietly, "Who was he?" One theory emerged. The man was the original builder of the tavern, watching over it in some binding way. Others believed he was a traveller who died mid-journey, and his soul found home in the canvas. No story was confirmed, no name ever matched. But sometimes, late at night, the light flickered near room 3's door, just once, briefly, like a blink. On the anniversary of the storm, Carwin placed a single candle under the portrait. It burned steadily, no draught, no flicker. At dawn, the wick was untouched, but the candle had melted completely. Only a clean glass holder remained, warm to the touch. A child once stayed in room 3. She stared at the portrait, then said, "He's lonely? He wants to be remembered." Her parents laughed it off. But later, when they left, she slipped a note under the frame. No one ever opened it. But after that, the room felt lighter. Still, the portrait remains. Dust never clings to it. Light always seems to catch the eyes, even when the rest of the room is dim, and if you stare too long, you may feel the urge to blink, because something might already be blinking back. So now, if you ever stay in room 3 and wake up feeling watched, don't panic, don't speak, just blink once, slowly, respectfully. Then turn away. After all, it's only polite to return the gesture. At the very top of the tavern, past the 3rd floor, and behind a door most guests mistook for a supply closet, lay the attic. The stairs to reach it were steep, narrow, and creaked no matter how gently one stepped. Few had reason to go up there. Only Carwin occasionally, when the roof needed checking or a storm blew something loose, but even he preferred to visit during the day, because the attic counted. It didn't count objects or visitors, it counted steps, not the number of people walking, but the actual footsteps taken, soft taps on the wooden boards. And every now and then, it counted more steps than had actually been made. Carwin first noticed it years ago. He'd walk up, count 12 stairs. But from above he'd hear 13. Once, 14. He tested it repeatedly. Same result. He'd step slowly, 1 foot after another, saying the number aloud, 1, 2, 3. But above, echoing faintly, came the final count, always 1 or 2 extra. He thought it was an illusion. Old wood. Shifting sounds. But when others began reporting the same, he took notice. One maid said she refused to go up anymore. "It counts wrong," she whispered, "and sometimes it counts before I even start climbing." Visitors rarely notice the attic unless they stayed more than a week. Then, drawn by curiosity or a draft, they might wander up. A writer once asked permission to explore. Carwin agreed. The man returned an hour later, pale, holding a page he had scribbled full of numbers. 32, he said. That's how many I heard, but I only took 16 steps. He never explained the rest. The attic itself was simple. Sloped, ceiling, small window, wooden beams, dust covered everything. Old chairs, faded trunks, broken lanterns, nothing threatening, but the air always felt alert. Not cold, not damp, just aware. As if the space itself was listening. Carwin once left a chalk mark on each stair to track sound. He walked 12 steps, marked 12. But later, when he returned, a new 13th mark had been drawn, imperfect, faint, like a finger dragged in dust. Then came the winter night of the heavy snow. A pipe burst, and water crept down from the roof. Carwin climbed up quickly to assess the damage. He slipped once, caught himself and muttered, 11. But above, a clear 13th creak answered. He paused, flashlight trembling. Then, without warning, the attic door slowly closed behind him. He turned, heart thudding. No wind, no draft. Yet the door had moved. He opened it again. On the top step, wet from the pipe, lay a single footprint, not his. Smaller, bare. It faded before he could call anyone to see it. After that night, he left a journal by the attic door. Every time someone entered, they logged how many steps they took and how many they heard. The numbers never matched. Guests sometimes wrote poetry in the margins. One child drew a picture of the stairs with eyes on every riser. They liked to watch feet, she wrote in purple crayon. One night, lightning struck a nearby tree and the entire tavern flickered with blue light. In the attic, a staff member taking stock reported hearing voices whispering numbers as if counting backwards. When she reached the window, she said the sound stopped, but her shoes were damp, though the floor was dry. Rumors began to spread. Some believed the attic recorded lost moments, each extra step a forgotten guest, or a regret someone left behind. Others thought the tavern had once had more floors, and the attic remembered when it wasn't the highest point. A few said the tavern had once housed a bell tower, and the steps were echoes from the tower keeper's final climb. No records confirmed this. But one guest claimed to have dreamt of ringing bells each night they stayed. They left a brass bell charm on the attic windowsill. It remains there to this day, never tarnishing. On quiet evenings, if you listen closely from the third-floor landing, you might hear it. Step, 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 even when no one is climbing.
Always just one too many, or one too early. So now Carwin no longer questions it.
He walks the stairs without counting. He lets the attic count for itself, because sometimes in places soaked with time, numbers don't follow rules, they follow memory. If you ever visit, and the attic door creaks open just a little as you pass, don't be alarmed, it's not asking you to enter, it's simply counting, waiting to see if you'll step forward and become a number in the floorboards yourself. Behind the pantry, where only dry goods were kept and few people lingered long, there stood a tall, narrow mirror. It had no frame, just a pane of glass leaning against the old brick wall. No one remembered placing it there. It simply existed, quietly, patiently. Most of the time it reflected as any mirror should, a box of flour, a leaning broom, sometimes Carwin passing through. But on rainy days, especially during long, silent downpours, it changed. It didn't fog up or drip. It didn't shimmer. It simply waited until no one was looking directly at it. And then it began to reflect something else. One cook, noticing a strange light, turned back toward it. She saw, behind her reflection, a garden. Not the alley outside, but a lush, misty garden with lanterns hanging from unseen trees and stone paths coiled like questions. She blinked. The image vanished. The mirror showed only the pantry again. She said nothing, thinking it imagination. Until the next storm. Carwin himself once saw it. The rain had begun at dusk, soft and steady. He walked past the pantry and froze, because the mirror showed the tavern dining room, but full of people, in old clothing, toasting with crystal glasses. The fireplace burned bright, though no fire had been lit. The chandelier sparkled as if new. He looked over his shoulder. The real room was dark and empty. When he turned back, the mirror was normal.
Again, he never told anyone. But whispers began. A waitress mentioned seeing a horse-drawn cart outside the pantry in the reflection.
A boy claimed the mirror had shown someone waving at him, someone with his own face. A guest walked in one evening, soaked by a storm, and gasped when he saw the mirror. "I just dreamed of this place," he muttered. That mirror was a gate. They tried covering it once with cloth and tape. During the next rainfall, the cloth fell, undisturbed, no wind, no movement. It just lay folded beside it, like it had been removed with care. Then came the heavy rains of mid-autumn. A new staff member, unaware of the stories, lingered near the pantry to sort spice jars. She turned, startled by a flicker. In the mirror she saw herself, but older, grey at the temples, wearing an apron stitched with roses. Her eyes were tired, but kind. And behind her, standing in that misty garden, was a child holding her hand. She fled, breathless. Days later she returned and whispered. She smiled.
At me, I was safe. No one knows what the mirror shows. It never reveals horror.
Only echoes, possibilities, fragments of might-have-beens or may-yet-bees. It seems to respond not to fear, but to stillness, not to questions, but to unspoken longing. A poet once left a note beside it. I saw her again. She didn't speak, but her eyes forgave everything. The poet never returned, but his boots remained near the pantry for a week, untouched, dry, despite the wet floors. Sometimes, during rain, the mirror does nothing at all. It reflects shelves, bricks, and buckets. Other times, it shows lamplight where there is none, or shadowed paths where no hallway exists. No one has dared touch it during a storm. Carwin once marked the bricks behind it with chalk, just to be sure. During a thunderstorm, he caught his reflection stepping back. Though he hadn't moved, after the storm, the chalk mark was gone. In its place, a line had been scratched with something thin and sharp, one gentle curve like the start of a spiral. The mirror is never cleaned. Dust refuses to cling. Light finds it easily, even in shadows. And if you pass it on a rainy night and feel the sudden urge to stop and look, don't worry. It's only wondering which version of you will meet its
gaze. Now, the pantry door remains unlocked, even when unused. Carwin leaves it that way, just in case. Some doors don't need handles, he says.
Some open only when the rain remembers. So next time it rains and you see an old mirror, pause before turning away. For some reflections are not memories, but invitations. And some glass doesn't just reflect the world, it chooses what world to reveal. In the hallway outside room 9, mounted high on the wall, hung an antique clock. Its wood was dark, nearly black, carved with spirals and leaves that had long since worn smooth. It didn't chime, its hands never moved. No one had wound it in. Decades, and yet, at exactly midnight, once a month, it ticked, just once, loud enough to echo down the corridor. Carwin had tried removing it once. He stood on a ladder, tools in hand, and reached toward the back. But the wood resisted. The screws wouldn't turn. The wall itself seemed to push back. After a while, he gave up. Not out of fear, but of exhaustion. As if the clock drained. Willpower, he left it alone after that. So did everyone else. But then guests began to notice things. One woman staying in room 9 said she awoke just after midnight and heard a single tick, followed by a knock on her door. No one was there. She asked Carwin about it. He offered tea and silence. A child, passing by the clock, once stopped and stared. "It's not broken," he said. "It's just waiting for something." He then added, "I think it's waiting for me." and skipped away before anyone could ask more. An elderly man claimed to hear it ticking continuously, but only when he closed his eyes. He said the sound came not from the wall, but from somewhere deeper, like a second heartbeat. That month, a guest brought an audio recorder. He placed it in the hall beneath the clock. At midnight, it captured exactly one tick, louder than expected, clear despite background silence. But when played back the next day, the tick was gone. Only static remained. The next month, Carwin stayed up to watch. Midnight arrived. The air grew still. The light bulbs hummed, and then tick, sharp, precise, like a finger-tapping glass. He felt it in his ribs. He began to log each occurrence. The clock only ticked on the night of a new moon, never during full moons, never at random, just the one night, just the one sound. A local historian visited to examine it. He brought books, tools, and a notebook. After several hours, he concluded, "It's pre-industrial, possibly older, but this wood, it's not local, it shouldn't be here." He touched the face of the clock and winced. "It's cold, but not from air." He left the next morning, without checking out, just walked into the fog. Years passed. The tick continued, always at midnight, always on the new moon. Some believed it marked time lost, not time kept. Others thought it was counting something backwards. A maid once found an old note behind a loose baseboard beneath the clock. It read, "When the final tick sounds, open the north door." There was no north door in that hallway, not then. But blueprints of the tavern showed that long ago a doorway had been sealed at the far end of the corridor. The bricks were older there. The floor dipped slightly, as if something beneath had settled. Carwin placed a chair beneath the clock and sat during several midnight ticks. He never felt fear, only the sensation of being noticed, not watched, not judged, just noticed, like standing near a sleeping animal that might stir if you moved too fast. Then one winter, a snowstorm silenced the tavern. Roads were closed. Guests stayed in their rooms. At midnight, the tick echoed louder than ever. It rang through the hallway. Lights flickered, and for the first time, the clock's hands moved, both pointing straight up. Then they stopped again. No one saw it move, but when Carwin checked, both hands aligned at 12. The next morning, a line of melted snow traced the floor beneath the clock, though no snow had entered the tavern. Just a path. Damp, curved slightly, leading nowhere. Now Carwin lets the clock be. He dusts around it. He respects the silence. And once a month, he listens, not out of curiosity, but out of acknowledgement. Acknowledgement. Because some clocks don't measure minutes. They wait for moments. And when they come, they let you know. Room 4 was like any other. Same key, same bedding, same drafty window, with frost creeping in cold months. Guests rarely requested it, and Carwin never assigned it unless no other option remained. Not because of danger, but because of something subtler, something unsettling. It wasn't haunted. Nothing moved on its own. No whispers, no shadows, no cold spots. But guests who stayed in room 4 always reported the same thing. It felt like the room was listening. One guest described hearing their own voice repeated a few seconds after speaking. Not an echo, but a whisper. Soft, delayed, just behind their ear. Another said they stopped mid-sentence during a phone call, sensing someone else on the line, though no one was there. A man once wrote in the room's journal, "Every time I said her name out loud, the air shifted, like someone was holding their breath behind the wall." He left the next morning without asking for his bill. Carwin had the walls inspected. No wires, no vents, no open ducts. Still, the feeling remained, as if the room didn't reflect sound but absorbed it, and
Remembered.
once during a rainy night, a musician stayed in room 4. He played a soft tune on his guitar. The next day, while packing, he stopped. The strings vibrated just once, a clear note, unplayed. He leaned in. The sound came again, faint and distant, the exact tune he'd played the night before. He checked every inch of the room. Nothing explained it. He returned weeks later, not to stay, but to sit quietly for an hour. He left a note. It remembered me. Another visitor, a writer, claimed the room finished her sentences. She would pause mid-thought, and a word would form in her mind, not one she had chosen, but one that felt correct. When she left, she said, "I didn't write that story, the room did." Carwin once stayed there himself during renovations. At night, he spoke aloud, simple words, fragments of stories, memories. Hours later, half asleep, he dreamed of himself standing in the center of room 4, listening to a voice reciting his own words back to him, in his voice, but older. When he woke, the air felt heavy, not oppressive, just full. He never stayed in that room again. Years ago, during a lightning storm, the power flickered across the tavern. Only room 4's light stayed constant, bright, unwavering. Carwin checked. No surge, no backup circuit, just light. That night, guests in nearby rooms reported hearing faint conversations through the walls, but not in English, not any known language. Gentle, rhythmic syllables, like lullabies from a forgotten alphabet. No recordings ever captured the sound. But a painter, inspired by his stay, returned weeks later with a canvas. He painted the room, not as it looked, but as it felt. The walls curved inward, the ceiling breathed, the furniture leaned slightly toward the center. At the heart of the room, a shape hovered, transparent, listening. He left the painting with Carwin. It hangs in the cellar now, turned to face the wall. And then, one spring evening, a child stayed in room 4 with her parents. In the morning, she asked her mother, "Why did the room ask me questions?" The parents thought it a dream, but when they returned home, the child began writing answers to questions she'd never heard aloud. Pages of them, thoughts that didn't belong to her but felt true. No explanation was found. The child is now a poet. Today, Carwin keeps room 4 unlocked but unoccupied. Occasionally, someone requests it. Curious travelers, dreamers, the kind of guests who don't just want sleep, but silence that listens. Because some rooms aren't places, they're echoes, they're memories disguised as space. And if you speak softly enough, they answer. At the base of the tavern's back staircase, a narrow wooden flight used mostly by staff, sat an old pair of shoes, black leather, cracked and scuffed, with frayed laces and soles worn nearly smooth. They never moved. Not during cleaning, not during storms, not during renovations. No one could say who they belonged to, and no one dared throw them away. They were always there, perfectly placed side by side, slightly angled outward. Carwin tried moving them once, just a few inches to sweep beneath. The next morning, they were back in their usual spot. No one had seen them shift. No one had returned them. They just resettled. A delivery boy once asked, "Whose shoes are those?" Carwin replied, "We're not sure anymore." The boy paused and said, "Then maybe they're still waiting." The shoes had an odd presence. They weren't dusty, though they sat in a rarely used hall. They didn't smell despite their age, and every now and then, just for a second, they looked new. The creases faded, the color deepened, like the memory of a shine. One stormy evening, a guest used the back stairs to avoid the crowded main hall. As he passed the shoes, he heard footsteps behind him, soft, deliberate, matching his pace. He turned. No one. But the shoes seemed warmer, like someone had just stepped out of them. The guest left early the next day. Another visitor claimed he dreamed of walking in those shoes, through foggy alleys and rain-slick roads, always turning corners that led nowhere. When he woke, his socks were damp, though his boots had been dry and untouched. An elderly staff member, working late one winter, paused to rest on the staircase. As she sat near the shoes, she whispered, "Still here, after all this time?" The next day, she received a letter postmarked from a city she hadn't visited in 40 years, signed by a name she'd thought long gone. No message inside, just a small pressed flower. She smiled and never passed the stairs without greeting the shoes again. Some began to say the shoes belonged to a traveller who never made it out of the tavern. Not because he died, but because he found something that kept him rooted, a memory, a promise. Or perhaps the shoes were his anchor, holding space until he returned. No one could prove anything. But they noticed that guests who lingered near the shoes often paused longer than expected. Some left notes beside them. One wrote, "If you find where they walked, tell him I forgive him." Another simply said, "Not all journeys need to end." One guest took a photo. Later, when zooming in, he noticed faint impressions leading from the shoes up the steps, footprints that weren't there in person. Dustless prints, clear only in the image. Carwin once thought of enclosing the shoes in glass, but something held him back. The idea of trapping them felt wrong, like caging a story still being written. So he left them untouched, resting where memory meets wood. Every so often, during windstorms or nights heavy with fog, a soft creak sounds from this bottom stair, not loud, not startling, just enough to suggest weight, just enough to suggest someone might be lacing up, preparing to leave again. Or maybe arriving, because not all footsteps echo in sound, some echo in time. And not all shoes are empty. In the tavern's long upstairs hallway, nestled between two wooden sconces, hung a portrait few people noticed. At first glance, it wasn't large, just a rectangular frame with an aging canvas inside. The subject was a woman seated in a high-backed chair, hands clasped in her lap, eyes calm and dark, a shawl draped across her shoulders. No nameplate, no signature, no story, at least none written anywhere. But Carwin remembered the day it
Arrived, it came in a crate. No return address, no invoice, no explanation.
Just the canvas, wrapped in linen with a note attached. She remembers quiet places. That was all. He thought it strange, but beautiful, and decided to hang it where few would mind. At first, nothing happened. Guests passed by. Some glanced at it. Others ignored it. But then the tilting began. Each morning, Carwin would find the portrait slightly askew, just a few degrees to the left. He'd straighten it. And the next day, it tilted again. Not more, not less. Always to the same angle. He suspected vibration, a sloping nail, faulty wire. He reinforced the hook, checked the wall, even replaced the frame's backing. But the tilt returned, always at night, always by morning. One night he stayed up in the hall, sitting across from the portrait, eyes heavy with sleep. For hours, nothing moved, but when he blinked longer than a moment, It had shifted. Not suddenly, not dramatically. Just tilted, as if it had always been that way. And the woman's expression? It never changed. Yet somehow Carwin felt watched, not menacingly, but with the quiet concern of someone listening too closely. Guests began to notice too. One woman paused while passing, then returned minutes later, whispering, "Her shawl was blue, it's burgundy now." Carwin checked. It was burgundy. No sign of blue, no signs of paint change. Another guest swore the portrait had eyes closed when he passed the first time, and opened the second. No other guest confirmed this, but the man refused to walk near it again. During a particularly foggy week, when the windows refused to clear and silence thickened the hall, 3 separate guests claimed to smell lavender when near the painting. One man placed his hand near the frame and recoiled. "It's warm," he said, "like skin in sunlight." Rumors spread that the woman was a long-forgotten owner of the tavern, that she had lost her family during a fire and now searched faces in silence. Others said she was never real, just a memory painted into existence. One child visitor asked her mother, "Why does the lady in the picture want to leave?" The mother dismissed it as imagination. But the next day, the portrait was found.
Leaning, not just tilted, away from the wall. The nail was intact, the wire untouched, the frame simply no longer hung flush, as if the portrait had tried to pull away.
Carwin took it down briefly, wrapped it, stored it in the cellar. For a week, the hallway felt emptier. Not lighter, not safer, just incomplete. Staff avoided it. Guests reported restless dreams. On the 7th night, a mirror in the hallway cracked, thin lines radiating from the center, forming a near-identical silhouette to the missing portrait's shape. That same night, Carwin dreamt of the woman. She sat in her chair, but this time in the hallway, eyes open wide, staring at him with a gaze not angry, but asking.
Asking to be seen. He rehung the portrait the next morning. It tilted by sundown. A few years later, a blind man stayed in room 12. As he walked the hallway with his cane, he paused directly in front of the portrait. He tilted his head and said,
Softly, "There's sorrow here, but not malice." He then reached out with his fingers, tracing the air. "She's still waiting for someone?" Carwin asked. "For whom?" The man smiled gently. "That's not for us to know. Some portraits aren't painted for us, they're painted for memory itself." Since then, no one has tried to remove the portrait again. Guests occasionally stop. Some linger. A few leave small objects on the floor beneath it. Dried flowers, folded notes, silver buttons, and once a tiny carved wooden chair. Every now and then, during certain moonlit nights, the glass of the portrait catches a reflection no one can trace. Not from the lights, not from the windows, just a soft shimmer, like candlelight flickering in another room. And the tilt? It still returns, always left, always silent, as if she's listening closely, not to the hallway, but to something behind it. At the heart of the old tavern's main lounge stood a grand stone fireplace, built from wide grey, slabs fitted tightly without visible mortar. Its mantel, carved from oak, bore no decoration, no initials, just a smooth, time-worn surface. There had been no firewood in it for decades, no gas line, no electricity. And yet, many claimed they saw it flicker with light, not flame exactly, just a warm shimmer like heat above asphalt, visible only at night. Only when the lounge was quiet. Carwin had stopped trying to explain it. Years ago, when he first bought the place, he tried lighting a real fire inside. The smoke choked the room, refused to rise, and drifted out as if the chimney didn't exist. But when he checked the flue, it was clear. Still, he never tried again. Guests began mentioning the ghost warmth. One said she awoke on the couch nearby and saw the room bathed in orange glow, shadows dancing gently on the ceiling. She sat up to find nothing there, only the fireplace, cold and bare, yet the warmth lingered on her skin. Others told of dreams. That felt real. Dreams of gatherings around that hearth, laughter, music, gentle clinking of glasses, a golden dog curled at someone's feet. But none of them recognized the people, just the feelings, belonging, return, peace. One man, a historian from a nearby university, spent an entire night cataloguing its oddity. He placed thermometers, light sensors, motion detectors. At midnight, all sensors registered a minor temperature spike, 3 degrees higher. The light meter flashed faint activity, but no source was ever found. He later described the sensation. It's like walking into a memory that never belonged to you, but missed you nonetheless. On particularly cold nights, guests seated near it often mentioned the smell of old cedar or pine, sometimes even cinnamon or burnt honey. Carwin, who kept no candles or incense, simply nodded when they asked. He'd long given up saying, "There's nothing there." During a particularly brutal snowstorm one winter, the power cut out. No lights, no heating. Carwin gathered guests in the main lounge, offering blankets and tea. They huddled close, nervous, whispering. Then someone gasped. The fireplace glowed.
Not fire, not sparks, just light. As if coals from long ago had stirred to life. The room warmed, not drastically, but enough. Just enough. And then, faintly, from somewhere within the stone, came the sound of a log shifting. The air filled.
With a deep, comforting scent, ash and thyme. No one spoke. The next morning, everything was cold again. But no one forgot. A child staying in the tavern during spring once wandered into the lounge and sat cross-legged in front of the fireplace. He stayed there for almost an hour, silent. When asked what he was doing, he replied, "She's telling me stories." When questioned further, he added, "The lady in the coals. She says I've been here before." Carwin checked the hearth afterward. Beneath a loose floor tile just in front of it, he found a silver ring, worn thin, almost smooth. He left it
There.
Another visitor, a man mourning the loss of his wife, slept near the fireplace one night. In the morning, he seemed calmer. He told Carwin, "She visited me in a dream, not to talk, just to sit by the fire, like we used to." His voice cracked.
I don't think that was just memory. Carwin now lights no candles near it. He never places decorations on the mantel. He keeps the hearth swept, bare, a place of respect.
Because some warmth doesn't come from fuel or flame. It comes from grief, gently remembered, from moments that refuse to leave, from echoes held kindly by stone. And sometimes when the snow falls heavy and the wind howls sharp against the shutters, the tavern doesn't feel cold at all. Because deep in that fireplace, something ancient stirs. Not alive, not dead, just waiting to glow again. Behind the counter of the old tavern, on a shelf that collected more dust than attention, sat a small leather-bound book. Its spine was cracked, its pages uneven. No title adorned the cover, just faded grooves, as if a name had once been etched and later erased. Carwin never remembered placing it there. No staff claimed ownership. And yet it remained. He first. noticed it during a slow winter evening. Reaching for a receipt pad, his hand brushed its worn edge. Curious, he opened it. Inside were names, dozens, each followed by short phrases, notes, thoughts, dreams. Some entries were signed, others weren't. He assumed it was an old guest book, but the entries weren't dates or thanks, they were confessions, apologies, longings whispered in ink. "I still smell your scarf when the rain comes." She said, "Wait." I waited. "I'm still here." No one remembers the yellow door, but I do. Carwin was intrigued. He placed a small sign beside it. "For thoughts that have no voice." Within days, new entries appeared, written in different hands, different moods, some trembling, some angry, some serene, yet no one had seen anyone write them. One night he decided to monitor the shelf. He checked the book hourly. It remained untouched, but by morning a new message had appeared. "You cannot watch what was meant to be heard." That day, he flipped through its older pages. Some entries had changed. Phrases he swore weren't there before had emerged. One, once blank, now read, "He's reading too fast." He left it alone after that. Guests began to ask about it quietly, as if mentioning the book too loudly might erase it. One woman wrote, "He never said goodbye, but this page feels like one." Another simply left a drawing of a hand reaching into darkness. A young man who stayed over the summer claimed the book knew his dreams. He described a recurring nightmare, a stone corridor, endless and damp. One morning, he flipped the book open to find a sketch of that same corridor. At the bottom, it read, "Keep walking, the door is real." He left without finishing his stay. Once, during a particularly quiet week, the book disappeared. No one could find it. Carwin assumed it had finally been taken. But 3 nights later, it returned, resting exactly where it had been, only now with a pressed daisy between its pages. The flower was still fresh. After that, the book began leaving messages for Carwin. Small things scribbled in corners. "Don't forget the cellar.
Lock.
The kettle will boil at 4:13. Say yes to room 6. He obeyed them all, never questioning. Somehow, things flowed easier when he did. One guest confessed he'd tried to write something, anything, but the pen wouldn't move. The book remained blank for him. Another said her entry disappeared as soon as she finished. "It didn't like what I wrote," she whispered. And yet the book never felt cruel, just discerning. It never allowed names to be repeated. Never allowed anger to stain the same page twice. Once, someone scribbled furiously ranting. The next day, those pages were blank again, replaced with gentle words about forgiveness. Carwin once asked aloud, "Who are you?" The book stayed closed for days. Then, during a rainstorm, it opened to a single line. Not who, when. After that, he stopped asking. One night, an old woman who'd visited decades prior returned. She'd lost her partner the year she stayed, and now walked slower, but still with fire in her eyes. She asked about the book. Carwin handed it to her, and she clutched it tightly. After 10 minutes of silence, she smiled. "He answered," she said. "He always used to correct my spelling." She left the book open on the counter. Inside, "I never liked semicolons. Still don't." No one else touched it that evening. Some guests began traveling just for the book. Some left poems, others confessions. One entry read, "I only spoke once, and now the silence speaks back." Carwin sometimes sat with it late at night, flipping pages, not to read, but to feel. There was always a warmth, as if the thoughts within still lingered, as if silence itself had fingerprints. He never tried to preserve it. No photos, no scans. It rejected cameras anyway. Every image taken of it turned out blank. Just the leather, cover, page closed as if guarding itself. Now the tavern is quieter. Fewer guests. More stillness. But the book remains. Always on the shelf. Always opening for those who truly need it. And sometimes when the wind howls past the eaves and the lights flicker, a page turns by itself, and somewhere, between the lines, something listens. Something waits, and something writes back.